Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do a book haul revisit. And you may notice I'm not in my library today. That's because Joel, my husband, is traveling, and my dog Teddy, who is snoring away right here, has been a little bit emotionally needy. So here is Teddy taking a cute nap, and he'll just be there. Yes, we did never take our Christmas tree down this year. We needed joy. And we're at the time of year where we're no longer late to take the tree down, we're early to have it up. That's what I'm going with. But anyway, the book haul revisit. This is where I look back at book hauls from this month that have happened in the past. Since we're in the month of September, I'm going to be looking at the September book hauls from, I believe, the last 5 years. Because we are looking at 5 years, to keep this from being an incredibly long video, here are some things that I have done. I am not going to talk about what these books are about. If you would like that information, I'm going to link all of the original book haul videos down below. You can go there and I will talk about the books and what they are about, read the first sentence and all of that stuff that I usually do in my book hauls. I have also removed any books that were purchased for my Pulitzer Prize project. If you're new here, I'm doing a Pulitzer Prize project where I'm trying to read all of the books that have won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. At some point along that way, I started purchasing copies of all of the books that have won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I have also started purchasing other books by Pulitzer authors, and those I'm including as part of the Pulitzer Project. They were purchased for a very different purpose. It's not really the same as purchasing a book with the intention of reading it at some time soon. It's purchasing a book because you have a project and you've decided that you're going to devote at least a portion of your personality to that project. I am also removing library builders. That's cases where I purchased a book to complete an author collection. I have done this with Louise Erdrich. Toni Morrison has entered that portion of it. And Sue Grafton was another one. So in cases where I'm just trying to get all of an author's books, I'm not counting it. Because again, different purpose than purchasing a book with the intention of reading it at some time soon. I have also removed any books that I had already read at the time I purchased them, because in that instance, I read the book, I liked it enough that I really wanted to have a copy in my library. Again, it's just a different purpose than purchasing a book with the intention of reading it sometime soon. And again, so I'm only including books that I purchased for myself with the intention or hope of reading those books sometime soon. We're going to start with the most recent book haul, so September of 2024, and we're going to work our way back to September of 2019. We're going to journey back in time and see. So my intention with this is to hold myself accountable for books that I purchase. You know, I have a big book addiction. I'm sure if you're watching this, you probably can relate or understand, even if you don't necessarily have an addiction yourself. So I'm hoping that I'll become a bit more of an intentional book purchaser. Has that really panned out? I don't know. But I have learned things, like I'm more likely to listen to a nonfiction book on audio than I am to read it in print. So my big watch out criteria is that I'm keeping track of books that I unhauled without reading. That's the criteria I really want to be careful for, because that's the sort of quote unquote failure. I don't like to think of them as failures. That sounds harsh, but I do want to be careful about that metric in particular. I'm also going to keep track of how many of the books I've read, how many of the books I have unhauled, and how many of the books I ended up listening to on audio. I personally don't really mind if I end up listening to a book on audio instead of reading the physical copy that I have. I know that's important for other people. I just think of it as an interesting thing to keep track of. So the only criteria I'm really watching out for is, again, those unhauls without reading. Now, without further ado, let's get to September of 2024. There are 5 books that meet our criteria from last year. Oh, by the way, I have also removed books that were gifted to me, whether by another person that I know or from the publisher, because I didn't spend money on those books. So the first book I hauled September of 2024 was Delinquents and Other Escape Attempts by Nick Reese Gardner. This is a linked story collection that was recommended to me by Morgan Talty. I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I have thought about picking it up several times. If you follow along, you know, because I'm a mood reader, what happens often is when I finish a book that I'm reading, I will go through and pick out several books that I am thinking of reading and think I might be in the mood for, and I will pick from that pile. And Delinquents and Other Escape Attempts has been in that pile several times. That's not to say that I'm not interested in reading it. That's actually to say I am interested in reading it because it has been in the mix. I just haven't quite been in the mood for it, or something else has been more the mood for that particular moment. So this is not going anywhere, and we'll see when I eventually get around to it. Then there was Teacher Man by Frank McCourt. This technically should be in the same case of completing an author's collection, because I read Angela's Ashes before Joel and I went to Ireland and absolutely loved it. And I know I'm going to end up listening to this one on audio as well, because Frank McCourt did such a good job with the audio, but I don't care. I just want to have copies of these books in my library. So part of me is thinking it's purchased for a different reason. I don't have to include it, but I am going to include it because I want to read this book. So I'm going to try to hold myself like a little extra accountability. Haven't read it yet. Really want to. And I think this one is actually the third book. I did recently get a copy of the second book, but again, I'd be listening to them on audio. So we'll see when I get around to it, but I have not yet. Then we have Gentlemen and Players by Joanne Harris. I did not have immediate plans to read this when I purchased it. I entirely did it because a bookseller that I used to work with, Kathy, who was probably the best bookseller I have ever known, or she's up there at least. One of her favorite books of all time was Gentlemen and Players, and I had never read it. So in honor of her, I purchased a copy of the book. Like I said, I didn't have immediate plans to read it. I don't know when I will, but I still want to. So at some point, I'll be getting around to it. When Bernardine Evaristo won, or co-won, the Booker Prize for Girl, Woman, Other, I looked into her backlist, and the book that jumped out to me the most, well, there were two. I'm blanking on the name of the one, and it doesn't have it in this, but there is another one, and Blonde Roots. Those were the two books that had jumped out to me the most. I have a copy of the other one. It's about the man who's married but has a gay lover on the side, Mr. Loverman. So that's probably like my top tier book to get to next for Bernardine Evaristo, but Blonde Roots is close on its heels. So I need to read Mr. Loverman, and then I will be reading Blonde Roots, because I loved Girl, Woman, Other enough that I want to read some of her backlist. So that's the plan. Haven't read it yet. Need to do Mr. Loverman first, but I will get there. So if you're keeping track, I am 0 for 4 in terms of books that I have read from my September 2024 book haul. Thank goodness for Justice by Larry Watson, which I actually just recently read. I'm filming this in the middle of September, and I think it was at the end of August I read this book. Really only because I wanted something kind of short to transition into September. It's just a fun coincidence that now I'm doing my September book haul revisit, and here it is. So I read this book very recently. I had wanted this one because I read Montana 1948 last year and loved it so much. This is a collection of stories that are about the family that is at the center of Montana 1948. It's very good. It's very good. And I'm glad that I was able to find this edition of the book. It's from Washington Square Press. Most of the editions that you see are from Milkweed, but I like this look, and I did read it. So yay, we got one. So of the 5 books, I've read 1. That, according to Google, is 20% of those books. I've not unhauled any, which is a big fat 0, and I'm okay with that. And that also means it's a big fat 0 for books that I unhauled without reading, because I haven't unhauled any of them. So we're not making any moves toward my watch out criteria right now. And I read Justice. I didn't listen to it on audio, so that is a 0 as well. Let's move back to September of 2023. This is an interesting one because only 2 books qualify for our purpose today. The first one is The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff, which I did read. This is sort of a sequel to Matrix Not really. It's part of what I think is going to be a conceptual trilogy. And I loved Matrix. So I was really keen on reading this one. Ultimately, I liked it. I didn't love it anywhere near as much as Matrix, but it's very good. I did read it. I listened to it on audio. So we will be factoring that in when we get to the end. The other book that I got a copy of in September of 2023 was Independent People by Haldor Laxness, who is a winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. It is translated. It does not say on the cover who the translator is. Translated from the Icelandic by J.A. Thompson. Haven't read it yet. Would really like to. And Patchett gave it a great recommendation, and I think at some point over the last year, Matthew Sharapa read Independent People and also really liked it. So haven't read it, but would like to. This is sort of a library builder. It was something I wanted to have in my library because the hope is that by having it in my library, I will eventually get around to reading it. And that doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. So I've read 1 out of 2. I don't even need Google. That's 50%. I can do that math on my own. I haven't unhauled anything, so that's a 0. I haven't unhauled anything without reading, so that's also a 0. I did listen to The Vaster Wilds on audio, so that's 1 out of 2, 50% again. And with that, let's move back to September of 2022. This is a larger book haul, in that there are 3, so we're 1 book more. I only actually have 1 of the books here right now. The first one was The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. I had pre-ordered that book because of how much I loved Hamnet. And I didn't really like The Marriage Portrait. I did a whole independent review of The Marriage Portrait that has spoilers. I'll link it down below if you want more about how I felt about that book. But ultimately, I just didn't feel that I needed to keep it because I was not a fan. So it's gone, but I did read it before it went. Then there was A Country for Dying by Abdullah Taya and translated by Emma Ramadan. This was something that had been part of the LGBTQ plus in translation read-along that I was doing in 2022 with Jen the Librarian. And I didn't manage to read it during the month that we were doing that book. And the feedback on it in the group was pretty mixed. So what happened is, over the 2 years since then, eventually I started thinking, my motivation to read this book has pretty well died. So maybe I should get rid of it. And that's what I ended up doing. So I did trade it in at my local used bookstore. It's not here anymore, but I hadn't read it. So this is where we start hitting my watch out criteria. The third book, the one I actually still have, is Heartstopper Volume 3. And I feel like I should stop including these because this is another case where I'm collecting all of the Heartstopper books as they're published. Not the addendum books, the ones that are not officially part of the series, but have just sort of latch onto it. I'm not reading those. So in a way, I could just leave these out, but I don't have any problem leaving them in because I'm not going to collect everything Alice Oseman has published. So I think for that reason they get to stay. So I read it anyway, and I have all of the other Heartstopper books that are officially part of the series, which have been published at this point. So of those 3 books that I brought into my library in September of 2022, I have read 2. According to Google, that is 67% of them. And that's not bad. I will take that. I will take that any day. I unhauled 2 of the books. So again, we're hitting 67%, but only one of those books was unhauled without reading, and that is 33% of this book haul. So we finally have my first book for my watch out criteria. And I listened to one of the books on audio. I didn't mention that. That was The Marriage Portrait. I ended up listening to that one on audio. And that is, again, 33% of the overall book haul. Let's take a journey back to September of 2021. We were all so young then, weren't we? And let's see how I do with the 3 books that qualify for our purposes here in that book haul. The first one, Mayflies by Andrew O'Hagan. Have not read it. This one is actually in the same place as Delinquents and Other Escape Attempts. I have not read it, but it has been in the mix several times. And it's just been edged out by another book that feels more the mood, or I have felt more of a pressing need to read at that moment. But I do still very much want to read Mayflies, and I'm happy to hold on to it until I do get around to reading it. I've heard consistently good things about this book. So sometimes your desire to read something fades away over time. This is a book where in the 4 years since September of 2021, the urgency and the desire has not died down at all. And that is rare and unique and just impressive. So I would still very much like to read that book. The next one is The Power of the Dog. And you could probably guess what inspired me to read this book. The film adaptation was going to be coming out not long after September of 2021. And I wanted to read the book before it came out because Vanity Fair did a podcast episode about, they will do book club episodes every summer for book adaptations that are coming out. They did a book club episode about The Power of the Dog, and their conversation about the book really made me want to read it and really made me urgently want to read it before the movie came out. So I bought this book and immediately read it. It ended up being my favorite read of 2021. I love this book, and I have since purchased another book by Thomas Savage and read it. And I've purchased a third, but I haven't read the third yet. So I love this book. If you have not read the book, read it. I did a book to movie comparison. I'll link that down below as well. It's just a very, very, very good book. And I know because the movie is out, people might feel like they're just going to watch the movie, but the book is so good. So I would really just encourage you to read the book. The final one is The Inexplicable Logic of My Life by Benjamin Alir Sands. This is actually in the same position as Mayflies. It has been in the mix a couple of times, and you can tell because there's a bookmark in there. So it's been in the mix a couple of times, hasn't made it to be something that I have read, but it's still very much in the mix. And again, when 4 years have passed and your urgency to read something hasn't died down, that is quite impressive. I would really like to get around to it. Joel really loved this book, so I'd like to get around to it at some point. And at some point, I like to think that I will. All right, of the 3 books that I brought into my library in September of 2021, I have only read one, and that is 33% of this book haul for September of 2021. But I have not unhauled any. That's a 0. I haven't unhauled any without reading, so that's also a 0, and that's good. And I did not listen to The Power of the Dog on audio. I read it. So that's another 0. Let's go back to September of 2020 and the 4 books that I brought into my library back then. September is interesting because, August and September can be impacted by the Booker Prize. And the Booker Prize is exactly why I wanted a copy of Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. I did read this book and I loved it. I think it ultimately made it onto the shortlist. It didn't win, but this is a fantastic book. And because of the urgency around the book or because of my interest in the topic, I brought it into my library and read it right away. So that is a success story and a good book. I don't think I'll be getting rid of it. And certainly not at any time soon. The next book was Transcendent Kingdom by Yajasi. I did read this book and I liked it a lot. I know this book was more of a cilantro book than her previous book, Transcendent Kingdom, which actually, that one is even a little bit of a cilantro book. Cilantro just meaning people either love it or they hate it. Homegoing was a bit of a cilantro book because some people didn't like the structure. I love the structure. I think it's a fantastic book. And in this in this case, at least part of the cilantro qualities that some people didn't respond to the character. I love this book. I thought it was really great. And I can't wait to see what Yajasi publishes next. So I read that one and loved it. Here's where we get to a failure in that I haven't read it yet. Oh, I almost threw it across the room. Unintentionally. It's Piranesi by Susanna Clark. I definitely still want to read this book. This hasn't been in the mix. It hasn't been in my pile the way that Mayflies, The Inexplicable Logic of My Life, and Delinquents have, but it is a book that I constantly see on my shelf and think about and hear people talk about and want to read. And again, after 5 years, to still have that sense of urgency to read something, it's really good. It's a very good sign. So I would really like to get to Parnasi. I don't know if I'm going to get around to the audio or if I'm going to get around to the print book at some point. I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe Jackie McMenamin, who's a commenter, has told me that the audio is read by Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's an actor I really like. And that sounds fascinating. So if that is true, and I'd have to double check, I would probably end up doing the audio. But either way, I just want to read this book at some point so I can catch up to it and see what all the fuss is. I have read 3 other books by Susanna Clarke: Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, The Ladies of Grace Adieu, which is my favorite, and that short one that she published last year, and I don't remember what that one is called. So Parnasi is going to be coming for me at some point. Then we have Winter Counts by David Heska Wanbley Wyden. I did read this book, and I thought it was good, but I didn't like it enough to feel that I had to keep it in my library. And in that period before we expanded my library, when I was having a really big crunch for space, I had to make some tough decisions. And I decided, since I liked this book but didn't love it, maybe I would be willing to let it go. So that's ultimately what I did. But I did read it before I let it go. And I think I actually listened to that one on audio. I did. So, all right. That's 4 books for September of 2020. I read 3, and I don't need Google for that. That's 75%. I can do that math all on my own. I've unhauled 1, and that was Winter Counts by David Heska Wanbley Wyden. That's 25% of that book haul. I did not unhaul any books without reading them, so that's a 0, and that's good. But I did listen to that one on audio, which means that that's 1 out of 4, and that again is 25%. Let's head back to September of 2019. I thought we were all so young in 2022 or 2023. Imagine how much younger we were in 2019. All right, let's start talking about these books. The first one was Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. I have read this book, and that was really before a lot of the controversy around this book being one of the most targeted and most banned or challenged books in this country. And because of all that storm that followed, I will never get rid of this book. I will always hold on to it. And, don't ban books. It's silly. It's silly. It's just a coming of age story about somebody kind of learning who they are. What's so scary about that? Then there is My Father and Myself by J.R. Ackerley. I did read this book. I did it as a buddy read with Sean Breathe's books, and I liked it. Didn't love it. It wasn't entirely the book that I thought it was going to be, but it was interesting on its own. Sometimes when a book is not what you expected, it turns out to be good. And in this case, it's just ultimately just okay. But it was really interesting, and it's interesting enough that I have held on to it, and I don't think I'll be getting rid of it. And my nonfiction section is not particularly packed, so I'm not really dying for space in that area. So I don't think it'll be going anywhere anyway. Then there was The Friend by Sigrid Nunez, and I didn't want to purchase that book because if you're unfamiliar, I'll tell you a little bit of what it's about here. It's about a woman who inherits a dog after somebody dies, and it sounds really tricky, and people alternately will be like, I'm so afraid of books where something happens to a dog. It really is like a bit of a trigger for me. And people told me, oh, no, you have to get over it. This is a good book. You should read it. And a bookseller really made that case. And I begrudgingly bought the book. And then after a couple of years, I was like, I am never going to want to read this. So I traded it in, and it's not with me anymore. So I unhauled it without reading, which means it will hit my watch out criteria, but here we are. Then there was Blacklight by Kimberly King Parsons. This was a story collection that had been on the long list, I believe, for the National Book Award for fiction that year. I did read it as a buddy read with Savage Reads, actually. And I just thought it was okay. So not long after I finished it, I decided to trade it in. I didn't think it was something I felt like I wanted to have in my library or needed to have in my library. So it went bye-bye. Then The Buddha in the Attic by Julie Otsuka. I ended up listening to that book on audio, and I thought it was just fine. And because I thought it was just fine, I didn't really feel like I had to keep it. So it has been unhauled. And that takes us to Wild by Cheryl Strayed. So, and actually, let me lump in the next book, which was Dead Wake by Erik Larson. I got lumped into taken in by a book sale, one of those buy one, get one 50% off. And I just this is one of those cases where I've learned now that I'm much more likely to listen to a nonfiction book on audio than I am to read it in print, because as 2 years or 3 years went on and I didn't read either one, and I kind of acknowledged it's like, if I'm ever going to read these, it's going to be on audio. When I was having that crunch for space in my library, I'm just generally pointing in the direction of my library. I'm not pointing at you. I let both of them go. So I think I've also had a reckoning. I felt like because so many people like Erik Larson, I needed to give him more tries. I've always had a caveat with the books of his that I've read. There are things I like about them, but there are things that kind of bother me. So ultimately, I also decided I don't need to be into what everybody else is into. So those are gone. They hit my watch out criteria. But next, we have Franny, the Queen of Provincetown, which I did read. This was one of the Little Sisters classics that was published by Arsenal Pulp Press. They identified queer classics that were in danger of being forgotten or out of print and brought them back. And I bought a bunch of books for the series. This one I have managed to read. I have not managed to read Finisterre by Fritz Peters, but I'm not getting rid of any of these books, at least not anytime soon. And I would still like to get around to reading this one. At least that's the plan. Then we have a big brick of a book. And I purchased this knowing that I was more likely to listen to it on audio. It's Down and Dirty Pictures, Miramax, Sundance, and the Rise of Independent Film. If you follow along, you know, in addition to being obsessed with books and the Pulitzer Prize, I'm also a big movie fan. So as uncomfortable as it would be to read a book about the Weinsteins and Miramax, it is kind of essential to where we are now with the film industry. So someday I will read this. It will be on audio, but because I'm not on a crunch for space in my nonfiction section, I'm not going to get rid of the book. And many people have cited this as one of those books that movie people need to read. So I'm kind of happy holding on to it for that reason as well. So haven't read it, but would like to. And in the same category is Wish Her Safe at Home by Stephen Benatar. I believe I found out about this book from Sean Breathe's books. Again, hauled it in 2019, so a long time ago. And because it has a pink spine, it does occasionally jump out to me. And I think, I really want to read that book. And I just haven't managed to do it. And the other ones that I've pointed out being in the mix, it's not at that level, but I do still very much want to read this book. I don't know when I will, but I would like to. Then The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Now, this is actually not the copy of the book that I hauled in 2019. I hauled a hardcover that I got from Book of the Month Club when I was a member. And the hardcover is like that much, it's like double the size of the paperback. And I usually need room in the S's and the T's in my library. So I came up with this idea when I saw this copy of The Secret History for sale at my library. So paperbacks as part of the library sale are $1. So for $1, I got a smaller version of this book that will fit better on my shelf. So it's not the version that I purchased, but it is the version that I have. Have not read it. I didn't think I was going to get to it very quickly. I do still want to read it, so we'll see when I manage to get around to that. And the last book in all of these book haul revisits is The Chestnut Man by Soren Sveistrup. This was a Book of the Month Club purchase. I read it and I hated it. I think that was the first book that I threw on my channel. That's how much I didn't like it. So it's not here anymore, but I did read it. So of the 13 books that I brought into my library in September of 2019, I've read 6. And that is 46% of those 13. I've unhauled 6, 46% of that 13. 3 of those are books that I had not read. So this is my watch out criteria, and I hit 3 out of 13, and that is 13% of this overall. 23%. That's 23% of the book haul from September of 2019. I listened to only one of those books on audio, which is 8%. Do I remember which one I listened to on? Oh, it was The Buddha in the Attic. That's the one I listened to on audio. So overall, looking at all of the books that I brought into my library in the last few Septembers, I brought 30 books into my library. That is pretty in line with the other book haul revisits I've done this year. So it's not higher or lower. It's right about in line with the amount of books that I have brought into my library. I've read 14 of those books, which is 47%. Now, my goal is to be at 50% or higher when I do these book haul revisits. So I'm just about there, and that is good. It'll be interesting to see how my coming September book haul might change these numbers when we do this again in a year. But 47% is good. That's good progress, and there's still a bunch of books in here that I would like to read, so I'm doing okay here. I've unhauled 9 books, which is 30% of that overall 30 book total. My watch out criteria, books that I unhauled without reading, is actually only 4, so it puts me at 13%. Now, my arbitrary number for that, when I started keeping track of that, which I believe was earlier this year, was that I wanted to keep that number at or below 15%, and I'm at 13%. And last month was the first time I failed and went over 15%. And the thing is, I've been thinking about it since then. I don't know if 15% is a reasonable number. It's just the number I had kind of settled on. So we're going to have to see, and I might rethink that as I continue to do book hauls. Maybe 15% is too harsh of a number, but we'll see. We'll see, because I've gotten close in some other months as well. So maybe I should give myself a little grace and change where I would like it to be. But for now, I'm keeping it at 15%, and I'm hovering right underneath that. And I only listened to 4 of the books on audio, which is 13% of the overall September book hauls. If you have recommendations for which books you think I should read that I haven't yet, let me know in the comment section down below. If you have recommendations based on my interest in any of these books, let me know in the comment section. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.